America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation, and I am so excited that we are joined by my very good friend, Jackie Cushman. She is a nationally syndicated columnist, conservative political strategist, and best-selling author known for her commentary on American values, leadership, and civic engagement. She's the daughter of former Speaker Newt Gingrich. She's also the co-founder of Learning Makes a Difference Foundation and a frequent contributor on politics and culture. Currently, she is serving as the chair of the Adams Memorial Commission, and she's the president of the Adams Memorial Foundation. Jackie, welcome to our show.
Elaine, thank you so much for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
Well, I was telling you before we came on air, I've been reading about this project of yours. Let me start with the newest word I've learned is semi-quincentennial, because we're coming up on 250 years since the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence next year, 2026. Seems like a very fitting project for you to work on, but tell us a little bit about your two roles, because there's a distinction between them.
Right.
And I know there's a story behind both of them. So let's start with whichever one you want to and fill us in on what you're doing.
Absolutely. So I'll start with the one that began first. I was appointed to the Adams Memorial Commission by President Trump at the end of his first term. So this is a congressional commission. The way it's structured legislatively is we have 4 presidential appointees, 4 congressional appointees, and 4 senators yet to be appointed. And the legislation itself states that we could not begin work until we had a majority of the commissioners appointed. So that didn't happen until a little over a year ago. So even though I was appointed under the end of Trump's first term, the work of the commission has only been around for really over a year after our congressmen were appointed.
Is that
so we have
COVID? Is that COVID?
Just because? No, it's because it's a slow process. I mean, so I've learned so much about memorial building and the process. It is a very slow process in a lot of ways for a good reason. You don't want things just popping up on in Washington, D.C. and the National Mall. But every memorial commission is different. They're all based on the legislation that's been approved and, passed by Congress, signed by the president to create the commission. So ours is really focused on building a memorial for John Adams, Abigail Adams, John Quincy, Louisa Catherine, and their family. And we've begun the work, but we already have legislation in process again. We can talk about that later. The foundation, the way these memorials work is you have a commission that is the structure and the implementation of the memorial, but you have to raise private money. So if you wanted to raise private money for the commission, you'd have to get people to write a check to the U.S. Treasury for the Adams Memorial. And that seems a bit daunting. So instead, what happens for all of these memorials, happened for Eisenhower, happened for World War I, is they set up a separate organization that's a 501c3 that is associated with the commission. So we created the Adams Memorial Foundation. It was approved for IRS 501c3 status last October, and so we are currently raising private funds to help us with this effort. So that's a short story. We can go into more details as we go along.
Well, so let's give it some perspective. Tell us, I'm going to admit to something that may sound kind of funny, but as I was researching all of this and preparing for this conversation with you, it hit me. There is no memorial for John Adams in Washington, D.C. There's the Lincoln Memorial. There's the Jefferson Memorial. There's the Washington Monument. And it hit me. I thought, wow, I guess it's never just sort of like, it was kind of an aha moment, I call it, where you just kind of like, duh. That's really interesting that, one of the founders of our country, first vice president, second president, son was the sixth president. I mean, there's so much there that contribute to the founding of our country and the values. And this has never been done.
You're correct. It's interesting. I had the same revelation when I was appointed to the commission. I didn't seek this appointment. It quite frankly came out of the blue. I think God has a sense of humor putting a Southerner. Obviously, you can tell from my accent that I don't come from the North. I do not come from Massachusetts. But it is a great project. It's an American project. My belief really is that Adams is often overlooked for a couple of reasons. First of all, he served between George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. And George Washington was this huge commanding figure, right? He was physically tall for his time. He was our commanding general. He was the father of our country. He clearly deserves to be recognized and honored. And then you have John Adams that served for a term. And then Thomas Jefferson came behind him. And he's this very, handsome, good looking, well off gentleman from Virginia. And his memorial reflects that same kind of approach in terms of it's big, it's vast, it's huge. And I believe that John Adams was just overlooked. And so that's what we're really working on, is how do we refocus on the Adams family? And we can go into why they're so important, but he nominated George Washington to be our commanding general. His was a nomination. George Washington was unanimously voted in. He was serving the committee to write the Declaration of Independence with Thomas Jefferson. He suggested Thomas Jefferson actually pen it. He knew that Jefferson was a better writer, and we needed a Virginian to actually pen it. And then when it came back to the floor of the Second Continental Congress, John Adams was its most vocal supporter.
Interesting. And so, I mean, I don't know how to actually start, because there's so much here, and I read so much. It was so interesting. The sacrifices that his wife made, and raising their, they had 6 children. I read 2 of them lived past childhood, but I mean, for modern day times, she was essentially a single mom.
Oh, absolutely. She's a fascinating figure. There's a great book if you want to learn more about Abigail, and it really fits into what Job Creators does in terms of entrepreneurship and making things work. She was really the entrepreneur of the family. He was a traveling lawyer. He was a circuit lawyer. Then he served in the Continental Congress. They were not a wealthy family like the Jeffersons and the Washingtons. She really had to make things work at home. She ran the family farm. There's a great book called The Unexpected Abigail Adams, A Woman Not Apt to Be Intimidated. It's actually really, so she figured out how did she run the farm, make money. She often asked John to send items back to the farm that she would then resell at a profit. Later in her life, she invested into different bonds and made money on that. She invested into land. She was an amazing entrepreneur. She was a very strong woman. And without her, we would not have John Adams.
And she did not have formal education. For that.
No, she did. She was not formally educated. She was, she educated herself to much degree in terms of she read a lot. She talked a lot with other friends. We are so lucky. We have an amazing amount, thousands of pages of documentation between Abigail, John Quincy, the other family members, both to themselves internally as a family, but also to other people. They were letter writers, and they knew, this is what's so interesting about the Adams. They understood that they were part of a very revolutionary time, right? Obviously, in retrospect, it's clear that it was, but they understood that. And so they kept documents of their letter writing between each other. So we have this firsthand account that's really fascinating. The Massachusetts Historical Society has it all online. You can go to the Adams papers and you can search by year, by person, by topic. And it really is an incredible insight into what was happening during the Revolutionary War.
Wow, that is fascinating. Well, tell us, I kind of was reading, as you mentioned, Adams was between these 2, massively big figures, Washington and Jefferson. And of course, being a redhead, I always recognize other redheaded stepchildren in those situations. Why do you, besides where he was, but why do you think it's been overlooked for so long? And why he hasn't been honored, his family's contributions. I mean, there's more than just him and his son as serving as presidents. I mean, there were a grandson was a congressman, I think I read. There's a lot there to talk about, in addition to, the informal contributions, personal sacrifices of Abigail. Is it a political reason or just overlooked?
I think he's just overlooked. I mean, they are a New England family, right? So they're hardworking. They were really guided by their faith in God, their love of country, and their love of family. Probably in that order, to the detriment of some of the children, quite frankly. And John Adams realized that. I mean, he was away for a large portion of the children's lives. He did take John Quincy with him when he was 11, when he went over to serve in the various courts over in Europe. John Adams is the one that negotiated with the Dutch to give us a loan during the Revolutionary War so we could stay afloat. He's the one that negotiated the Treaty of Paris. His son served both in Prussia, Russia at that time, but they were a family that had service above everything else. But they weren't a flashy family. They didn't have big houses like Monticello. They didn't have Mount Vernon. They didn't have a lot of money. They were New England. They put their head down. They worked hard. They made a huge difference. And he even wrote, I don't think I'll be remembered for what I did. And in some ways, that's probably why they kept their letters. So there would be a written documentation of what happened and how they were involved. But I guess part of why I love this project is, this memorial is not really just in service to the family, even though we should recognize the family, but it's really in service to the nation, because they provide us with an amazing example of families that love their country, that love one another, that instill the right values in their children. And the other thing that they give to us is hope for the future. Because if you read their letters and think about what they went through and know where we are now, it gives you great hope for our future as well. They could not have known 250 years ago, we're a year away from the Declaration of Independence. And for us, it looks like it was inevitable. It was not. They had to live through that. And so I think it really also gives us a great perspective of hope for our country in the future.
I love hearing that. Today, I kind of want to bring us forward to today. We're so divided. We're bitterly divided, not just divided. We don't just have different opinions. It's bitter. It's angry. It doesn't feel that good a lot of the time, the way the country is so divided on almost every issue. I feel like there's not a consumer product out there that can't be politicized. You name it. We're bitterly divided. How do you think a President Adams would handle such division today?
It's interesting you bring that up, because we always have factions. And in fact, George Washington in his farewell speech warns about political parties and factions. But John Adams, when he and Thomas Jefferson were in competition for the presidency at the end of his first term, it was if you think it's nasty nowadays, it was a very, very ugly, hard election. He lost that election, probably to some degree because one of the greatest contributions he made as president was keeping us out of war with France. That information was not transmitted to the United States until after the election. That could have made a difference. But I think what he would do in retrospect, remember, he and Thomas Jefferson were very, very close, obviously during the Second Continental Congress, when Jefferson wrote the Declaration and he argued for it, and it was adopted eventually with some changes. But they had a falling out. I mean, a lot of this was over political, to your point, political factions and, this very kind of nasty approach. But they reconciled near the end of their lives. And they have there's this lovely correspondence between the two of them on a very personal level near the end of their lives, where they became friends again. And so I do think that's part of the story of John Adams, is that while we do, we all have, many of us have strong opinions, but we shouldn't let it get in the way of personal connections. And I do, the other thing that I think really is helpful is when you look at their faith in God. I think if you start first with the faith in God and then love of country, that it reminds you that every person is a child of God, not just those that agree with you, but every person is, and that it's up to us to treat them with respect, even while we make sure we can articulate our differences of opinion.
I would imagine that you speak from great experience with the family you grew up in and the political times, and just everything that you saw from that perspective. That's very meaningful coming from you, and a great lesson that I think we should all listen to.
Well, it's a hard lesson to learn. I mean, my dad ran in 2012, and that was a very, and many times very, very personal and could be ugly. And I had young children at the time, which made it, I think, a little harder for them than for me. I'd been through it. My dad started running for Congress in '74 when I was 7 years old. So it's really all that I know. But it is a great lesson. You have to be able to take things not at a personal level, but really when people say something, it really says much more about them than it does about you, even if they're talking about you. So you have to really be able to step back, look at things from a broader perspective. My dad's really good at that, to really kind of broaden up the perspective and look at the whole field of vision, and then try to look at it from a different perspective and try to articulate why you might have a difference of opinion. The reality is you're never going to convince someone of your opinion if you yell at them. But if you can smile at them, listen to them, and then try to re-articulate where you're coming from, you actually have a shot.
I should play this episode for a few friends that appear to not be very happy with me after November. So you have a big challenge in front of you. Although I know in March, the Congress, the Adams Memorial Great American Heroes Act was introduced in Congress to reauthorize the commission. What's the process there? What's the status? Walk us through that sausage making.
Exactly, and it is sausage making. So we are very lucky. We have Congressman John Molinar, who is from Michigan. He's one of our commissioners. Great guy, Marine. So he introduced this bill into the House. It's currently sitting in the Natural Resources Committee because that's where it lands it's part of the National Park Service and Department of Interior. So it's in that committee. We should hopefully have a committee hearing in the next month and then move to the floor for a vote. So it's a relatively slow process. We're doing three things in that bill. The first is we're reauthorizing the commission. All commissions are authorized for a limited amount of time. It's very standard to have them reauthorized. This is not, anything new or exciting. It's pretty basic. The second thing we're doing is we're asking for a specific site to be included in the site selection process. And the third thing we're doing is cleaning up some language that's a little, conflicting in terms of the underlying legislation. So hopefully, the challenge I think we have is that it's not necessarily Adams is not alive, so we're not trying to build this while he's still here. So we have to create our own sense of time pressure, which I think the 250th, I can't say that big long word, so I say America's 250th. The 250th, it really provides us with that time pressure. And I had a really funny, great encounter last week with Speaker Johnson. I was in the White House on a tour with Karen and John Adams Morgan, who's a descendant of John Adams. And we obviously God was in charge of scheduling, but we ran into Speaker Johnson and his wife, Kelly, and got to spend a few minutes with them. They're huge Adams fans. He's very interested in this project. And, I think that will be helpful. But it's also the funny thing about this project, everywhere I turn, when I run into people, I find more Adams fans. I mean, people just think he's the neatest guy. He's just overlooked. I mean, John Quincy was a fascinating man. After he was president, he served in Congress for almost 17 years. I mean, this was a very accomplished family. I could talk about them for way too long than you have, but they well deserve to be recognized in Washington.
Interesting. So what happens now? It's been reintroduced. You're going to have a hearing in a month. Do you expect it will pass and be reauthorized? Does it have to go over to the Senate to be reauthorized, or it can happen out of the House?
Absolutely. It has to go over to the Senate as well. So we expect it to move forward. Again, we have some great champions in the House. We have a lot of co-sponsors. So for those that are watching, the things that you can do to help us is obviously you can call your congressman or write them, email them and tell them that you're for this act so they can understand that it's important to move forward. We also have a website, theadamsmemorial.org for the foundation. You can sign up for our mailing list to keep up to date with what's happening, as well as we'd love to have donations. But we're moving forward. We're very optimistic about where we are, and it's been. I think we have the luxury of being near the 250th because people all of a sudden are really interested in what
Mhm.
actually happened to found our country. How did it happen? And who were the people that made it happen? And that is Abigail and John Adams.
What do you think would happen with sort of the whole woke? I mean, we've got rioting in the streets or peaceful protests, however you want to look at it. We've got just, it's like the crazy, you know what I mean? And I just think we've got, not to veer too far off of where I'm at, but boys and girls sports and like, I realize it's a different time and there were different, you know, it's hard to compare times, but
Hmm.
essentially a lot of some of the founders have been attacked for owning slaves. So I guess I'll stick with what I can, how I can stay in the same channel. He did not own slaves.
So he and John Quincy were the only two of the first seven that did not own slaves. There's a great in the book that I mentioned about Abigail Adams. There's a great story about how she helped a black child who wanted to go to school, but in their area, not even, I mean, they were in Massachusetts, was told that he could not go to school, and she helped make sure that he could. I mean, she went to the schoolmaster and said, "Oh, actually, he is. He's going to go to school." And then you have John Quincy, who not only defended the slaves from the Amistad slave ship who revolted, he argued in front of the Supreme Court, and he got their freedom secured. But he was also probably the most articulate arguer against the gag rule, which would have prohibited the argument of slavery in front of the Congress. And so while he did not live again, so he died while he was a congressman. He actually collapsed from the floor house, which is now Statuary Hall. And he served with Abraham Lincoln for 3 months. So, in a lot of ways, he set up the Congress to be able to withstand the Civil War. The other interesting thing is his son Charles was ambassador to the United Kingdom, to England, during the Confederacy, right, the Civil War. And Charles was the one who kept England from recognizing the Confederacy. So if you can imagine, during the Civil War, if England would have acknowledged the Confederacy, what that would have meant to our nation. But Charles was over there as ambassador to the court of St. James, and he prevented that from happening.
Amazing. Really
Mhm.
interesting. So do you think that, again, back to our bitterly divided country, you called this an American project at the top of the
Mhm.
show? Not Republican, not Democrat. Do you see a project like this, an educational project that could bring people in for the, let's say it again, semi-quincentennial anniversary of the Declaration of Independence next year? People are interested, seeing searches more for history on the founding of the country. Do you see a project like this becoming a uniter? Are you bringing in Democrats um, in the House and the Senate that are interested in being a part of this, being on the commission?
Absolutely. This is a bipartisan effort. We have Stephen Lynch, who is a Democrat he's actually the congressman from Quincy. He's on our commission. He's been a very strong supporter of this. And unfortunately, our other Democratic commissioner, Congressman Jerry Conley, unfortunately passed away. So he will need to be replaced. But he was a really strong supporter. And what I love about this project is when we have commission meetings, we have Republicans and Democrats in the same room, but we're all focused on the same thing,
Right.
which I think is so important today. It's so easy. I mean, this is true in any relationship, not just in our nation, our current, situation, but in any relationship. It's so easy to focus on the negative. But if you can find projects that are positive, where you can work together, where you can get something accomplished, it can really change an entire relationship. And I really do believe that as we move forward and bring people together across the country that care about the founding of our nation, I think it really will be a uniter in many different ways.
I do too. And I think I could see that. I could see why you would think that. And I think just the basic education, the foundational education of bringing people back to the founding of this country, the ideals that we were founded on, freedom and opportunity. I think that should be a uniter. I mean, it is frustrating that we're so divided, and it's tough. And so when I hear about projects like this, or even members of Congress who are working together on things that are, not in the mainstream media, they're not front and center, they're not part of economic legislation that's being argued over, or sociocultural things being argued over, but projects like this that are very meaningful and go to the heart of who we are as Americans. I think it's a great thing that you're doing. I think it's a great project to work on. I was so excited when you sent me this email and told me about the project. I was really excited to talk about it and have you on. So thank you so much for coming on and joining us. How can people help support this beyond? Well, tell us how people can help support what you're doing, how on the reauthorization, but also on the funding side, because that's important.
Absolutely. It is very important, always, right? So, and we are working on educational programs, and obviously they do need funding. So again, the adamsmemorial.org is the foundation website. For the reauthorization, you can contact your congressman. It's HR 2306, to the Adams Memorial Act. So you can tell them that you're in favor of that. We would love to have donations. We'd love to have you sign up for our mailing list, but also we're on social media, and we're doing a really fun project called The Road to 250, because I can't say that big long word. So it's The Road to 250, in their own words, Abigail and John Adams, and it has excerpts of their letters during this Road to 250. So you can see 250 years ago what they were writing, what they were feeling, what they were thinking, what was happening. So follow us on social media, spread the word. It is a great project. I am lucky to be involved. I'm grateful for President Trump for appointing me to this commission, and I'm really grateful to you for having me on. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for all you're doing, Jackie. Thank you for joining us on Main Street Matters, America's Small Business Megaphone. Thank you all for tuning in for another episode. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. You can find the audio version anywhere you get your podcast from, and you can watch the show on the Job Creators Network channels, YouTube and Rumble. And we'll be back soon for another episode.